Today, I'm going to be going through the worst ways to play Call of Duty. To be blunt, these versions should have never existed. Let's dive in. First up, the Nokia N-Gage version of Call of Duty. So for everyone watching right now under the age of 30, this is an N-Gage, a cell phone handheld gaming console hybrid put out by Nokia back in 2003. And as you might be able to figure out by just looking at it, this thing sucked. The buttons and their layout felt uncomfortable to use, the screen was outdated even for that time, and it was shaped like a taco. But before they officially discontinued this weird little handheld device, Activision actually released the original Call of Duty for it back in 2004. Now, already looking back at the original COD can be a bit of an eyesore, but this is easily the worst this game has ever looked. Choppy frame rates, muddy graphics, and an entire 176 by 208 pixel resolution was the least of its problems. Enemies will hit you with a pinpoint precision before the draw distance even reveals them to you on screen. And even when the game does load them, they can be difficult to see because of the low res and poor lighting. And on top of that, the game isn't a direct port of the original Call of Duty, meaning that the engine and content itself are completely different to fit the N-Gage's limitations as a cell phone from 2003. This actually meant that the levels were simplified, but to make up for it, they turned up the enemy's health, making them bullet sponges, seemingly to draw out the runtime. Now, even back in 2004, COD always had a decently active multiplayer scene, and the N-Gage attempted to bring that along with its handheld version as well. But again, the limitations of the device meant you could only play via Bluetooth with the other N-Gage systems within arm's reach of each other. And given that the system was killed after only 2 years due to low sales figures, odds are even back then, you weren't finding enough people to ever fill a lobby. Now, Nokia wasn't the only other company to receive poor ports of existing COD titles. Allow me to introduce Call of Duty on the Wii, a collection of 7 titles spread across the Wii and Wii U that attempted to bring this generational FPS built around precision and speed to a system specializing in motion controls. Now look, the Nintendo Wii was a fun console, and to this day, it's one of the best selling of all time, but it had a very specific niche: party games. The Wii was built around hanging out in the same room with family and friends playing Wii Sports, or Smash, or some other game like that, which meant that porting over what is largely an online experience just didn't quite fit from the jump. And that's before even getting into the broken motion controls that you had by waving your hands wildly in your living room while the guy on screen just inexplicably shoots the air, ground, or basically anything except for what you were trying to aim at. That said though, if you had a classic controller, those were still supported. So it wasn't all bad if you could overlook the terrible graphics and 2006 era Nintendo online connection. However, other than a few small differences like COD 4 removing the eavesdrop perk because voice chat wasn't a thing on the Wii, these games were effectively the same as their Xbox and PlayStation counterparts, except for World at War and COD 4 single player, which added a new squad mate mode where you could kind of play in co-op, where one player was in control of the movement while the other aims and shoots the gun. A completely bizarre addition that seems like they were trying desperately to make it more of a couch co-op type experience that Wii players were used to. But overall for the Wii, we had COD 3, COD 4, World at War, Black Ops 1, and then finally MW3 in 2011. But even then, Activision and Nintendo weren't done with their relationship, going on to release Black Ops 2 and Ghosts, the new Wii U console. Now, these two weren't nearly as bad to play as the others because motion controls were less of a focus, and the jump in quality between the Wii and Wii U finally brought the hardware close enough to the Xbox 360 and PS3. The graphics were pretty comparable, but the overall poor sales figures of the Wii U itself meant that after Ghosts, when the rest of the series began making the leap onto the PS4 generation, these Nintendo ports stopped dead in their tracks for good. Now, despite that shift from Xbox 360 and PS3 to the Xbox One and PS4 back in 2013, many of the next few games in the series would still release for last-gen consoles too. And while for the most part these games were the same as their next-gen versions, just with worse graphics, they were technically ports of the original, meaning they developed it on next gen and then worked backwards to get all of it to fit last gen, which resulted in various bugs and missing features that only got worse as the years progressed. And this leads us to Black Ops 3 on the Xbox 360, possibly the worst last gen port of all time in all of gaming. First of all, there was no campaign. None, which honestly maybe was for the best.
Train go boom.
So that meant that the game itself was now down to just multiplayer and zombies. But wait, that's not all, because even over in those modes, the following key features were missing. There was no emblem editor, no gunsmith, no supply drops, and everything that was supposed to be in supply drops weren't available either. There's no theater mode. Ground war was missing. Nuketown never released on this version at all. There was no split screen. Frame rates were capped at 30 FPS in some modes, and dedicated servers didn't make it into the port at all. And on top of all that, the only DLC pack to release on the last generation was the first, which meant that as far as zombies goes, you only had Shadows of Evil, The Giant, and Der Eisendrache for the entire year. Then let's finally just talk about the elephant in the room. This thing just looks horrible. Pixelated textures, lighting that didn't even make any sense, and a complete lack of particle and smoke effects. This is somehow the worst looking COD on the entire 360 generation, which is crazy because it was also the last. But why did Black Ops 3's port end up so comically bad? Well, the rumor is that Mercenary Technology, a studio known for their work porting similar games and even working directly on a separate Call of Duty spin-off we'll talk about in a bit, was brought in specifically for this title. But about 4 months before launch, it was in a dire state, resulting in Beenox coming in to try to salvage the remains. And because they only had a matter of months to turn it around to release on time with the next gen version of the game, they had to make some sacrifices to make sure it even ran at all. And thus, last gen Richtofen was born.
I'm so sorry.
But then we're gonna fast forward another few years, and even the Xbox One and PS4 eventually end up outdated too. And we actually find ourselves in a very similar situation to Black Ops 3. With the player base split between console generations, Activision has to always be mindful of releasing their games on both PS4 and PS5, which is where we end up with Black Ops 7. Now, we'll be quick on this one just because it's not nearly as bad as BO3 was, but the PS4 version of BO7 similarly has all kinds of graphical issues and performance dips. It's not unplayable or anything, but it definitely feels like it's the worst way to play the current COD. Okay, so now we have the zombies-only Call of Duty title that everyone's been asking for. Kind of. This is Call of Duty Zombies, a standalone release of World at War Zombies for the iPhone and iPod Touch in 2010. Now, mechanically, it's pretty much the same as the console version, except now with additional difficulty options to make the game a bit easier, which makes sense since the game's touchscreen controls were just awful. Maps-wise, the $10 app came with Knock by default, and Shinonuma and Verrückt available for purchase for an additional $5 each. However, a few months after release, the game dropped to only $5 total, made Shinonuma and Verrückt free, and also added The Rise in for good measure, which funny enough actually makes it currently the cheapest way to experience all 4 original Zombies maps at this point. The following year though, they also released a sequel app, Black Ops Zombies, which as you might expect in the same concept, but with the Black Ops maps instead. However, unlike the previous game, it didn't quite hit every Black Ops map. It featured Kino and Dead Ops by default, with only Ascension and Call of the Dead releasing a few months down the road. And what's extra strange about this version of the Call of the Dead is that its trademark celebrity cast was replaced with the original Zombies crew, probably as a cost-saving measure or possibly some licensing issues. And from COD ports in the smartphone era, we're gonna go back a bit to COD ports in the dumb phone era, with COD 4 Mobile back in 2007. This is a single player only third person take on Call of Duty 4. And as you can see, it's more of a literal arcade game where you control a squad from top down, running around the environment and taking out bad guys. As far as old cell phone games go, it's not particularly bad or anything, but it's just not Call of Duty. And looking back on it now, I can't imagine anyone having more than 5 minutes of fun playing this thing. Now this is Black Ops Declassified, a game that, unlike a lot of the others on this list, isn't a port of an existing game, but a completely original entry into the series. Declassified was developed back in 2012 for release on the PS Vita. Now, if you don't know what the PS Vita was, don't worry, because no one really did. Essentially, it was PlayStation's handheld console in the early 2010s, a cross somewhere between a PSP and the tablet from the Wii U. Suffice to say, the PS Vita didn't take off, but before they knew it was going to be a flop, Activision had nihilistic software and mercenary technology work on a new game dedicated solely to this console. And like I said, this is a full game in the Black Ops series, with a 10-mission campaign slotted in between Black Ops 2's past missions and Black Ops 6. It focused on a new character, Ryan Jackson, researching missions that Mason, Woods, and Hudson went on back in the 70s and 80s, which you get to play through as he learns about each. It doesn't really have much story implications, and it's not super clear whether or not these events are canon anymore, but it's kind of interesting looking back at these little pockets of the Black Ops universe like we had never seen before. In addition to the campaign, there was of course multiplayer, which had a completely original map pool and even its own version of Nuketown titled Nuke House, which was basically just the original cut in half and focused only on the yellow backyard. One disappointing thing is that zombies didn't make it into this game, and instead its own third mode was Hostiles, a simple survival type mode where you just needed to kill endless waves of enemies. And as for why it's on the list of the worst ways to play, it's for a lot of the same reasons as the others we mentioned. The graphics were a huge step behind anything you could play on console or PC, and plus the consoles were janky and just lacked the tight movement and gunplay that COD usually does. And sticking with the Black Ops universe, remember when we talked about Activision being done releasing games on the Nintendo consoles? Well, I kind of left a few out. This is Call of Duty on the Nintendo DS. A total of 5 more games released for the DS alongside their console counterpart. And for the most part, these all follow the same design philosophy as Declassified. They aren't direct ports, they're all their own games loosely inspired by the originals. And when I say loose, I mean loose. They're all kind of blended together and have vague stories that usually fit alongside the actual campaign's missions. Like you're another soldier fighting in another battle during the MW2 campaign. But it wasn't important enough to be featured in the main game, so it got kicked down to the minors on the DS. But the main one we want to focus on here is the Black Ops version, which is an addition to the weird knockoff campaign and simple multiplayer of the rest. Also, it features zombies, coming with 4 completely original maps: House, Facility, Temple, and Overlook. So obviously, just judging from the names, they aren't the biggest and well-made zombies maps of all time or anything, but it's really surprising that just the sheer amount of new content created for these tiny little ports back in the day. And finally, we've reached Call of Duty Strike Team, another mobile game released back in 2013 that, in addition to being your standard first-person Call of Duty experience, also wove in some top-down tactical gameplay where you'd move your soldiers from cover to cover, similar to an RTS. It's actually kind of similar to Black Ops 2's Strike Force missions, where you'd be swapping perspectives on the ground and attempting to command your side to victory. It was a single player only game that, like the others, had a story that fit in between several other titles, with this one taking place in 2020 during a battle gearing up to be Black Ops 2's campaign, which had been released the year prior. And as far as mobile COD games go, it's actually pretty solid. Its touch controls aren't great, but to be fair, touch controls are always pretty bad even at their best. But even with decent enough graphics and controls, that doesn't change the fact that if this was your one and only introduction to Call of Duty, chances are you probably weren't sticking around. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the worst ways to play Call of Duty. Let me know down in the comments, did you play any of these? Were some of these your first Call of Duty experiences? I know a lot of you guys at home are big Call of Duty people on the Wii. So let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know if I missed any, but I think this was a very solid list. I don't know if solid is the word we want to use, but I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you did, subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you in the next one.